Hello and welcome. You're watching Daybreak on A News. I'm James Ezimoha. Let's see your headlines. Israel rejects U.S. peace plan for Gaza, demand full disarmament of Hamas. Russia and Ukraine exchange a wave of strikes as both sides report casualties. And devastating wildfires continue in both Canada and Europe as thousands are forced to flee their homes. Welcome. Now, Israel has formally rejected a U.S.-backed roadmap for Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists that Israeli forces will not withdraw until Hamas is fully disarmed, as talks with Washington continues.
Israeli forces will not withdraw from Gaza until Hamas is fully disarmed. That's what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said at a cabinet meeting on Sunday. It marks Israel's first official rejection of US President Donald Trump's 15-point plan. He said Israeli forces would continue carrying out attacks in Gaza to thwart threats. Netanyahu said Tel Aviv is still discussing the document with the United States, with some proposals acceptable to Israel and others not.
Israel rejects the 15-point plan. I heard that there were those who said, "You didn't say it," but we did say it, and here I am saying it again. Israel rejects 15-point plan. The IDF will not carry out any withdrawal until the dismantling of Hamas and its weapons. And when I say dismantling Hamas and its weapons, that means heavy weaponry, less heavy weaponry, and smaller arms. All weaponry.
The plan was drafted in May by Nikolay Mladenov, the High Representative for Gaza of the US-led Board of Peace. President Trump formally announced that the board had reached an agreement on the complete disarmament of Hamas and other armed groups back in July. Hamas said a day later that it had accepted the latest version of the roadmap for the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire, but it conditioned weapons arrangements on a complete halt to what it called aggression, an Israeli withdrawal and progress on reconstruction. The ceasefire took effect in last October. Since then, Gaza-based health authorities say Israeli attacks have killed more than 1,250 people and injured more than 4,100 others.
Meanwhile, Palestinians in Gaza City say they were disappointed by Netanyahu's rejection of the roadmap.
Palestinians in Gaza City have expressed disappointment after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected US President Donald Trump's latest Gaza plan. Residents said they had hoped the proposal would bring an end to the conflict and ease months of killing, destruction and displacement.
We were happy in the beginning that the war would stop for us. In general, it was excellent joy for the people of Gaza. Now, with Netanyahu's decision, it disappointed us, honestly. We felt like we are going backwards.
For many, the continuing uncertainty has deepened concerns over how long the suffering in Gaza will continue.
We were surprised that he rejected the plan. We have no one but God to look for us. We want the war to end, for the suffering of Gaza to end, the killing, strikes, displacement. Every day there are assassinations. Every day there are injured and killed people. We want to live like the rest of people, live like the rest of the countries.
President appealed to those involved in the negotiations to consider the impact of repeated delays and disagreements on civilians. Hamas says it remains committed to the roadmap agreed with mediators in Cairo. But for residents in Gaza, the immediate concern remains an end to the conflict and the uncertainty surrounding their daily lives.
Now, 37 Palestinian prisoners released by Israel were brought to Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis on Sunday. They arrived through the Karim Shalom crossing under International Committee of the Red Cross escort, where families gathered to welcome them. The Palestinian Health Ministry said the prisoners were in extremely poor health and alleged they had suffered severe abuse during detention. Meanwhile, 7 Palestinians have been injured by Israeli fire across Gaza, according to medical sources, with shelling and gunfire also reported in several areas. 6 of those were taken to Nasser Hospital after Khan Yunis was hit, while another was injured in Gaza City, according to reports. Israeli forces also reportedly fired on homes and tents sheltering displaced Palestinians. Meanwhile, more than 20,000 approved patients were reportedly trapped behind strict border closures. Patients at the Al-Shifa Medical Complex issued a global appeal for medical evacuation. Now, Israeli artillery fire has struck 4 villages in southern Lebanon, days after the latest U.S.-sponsored talks between the two sides ended in Rome. Lebanon's state-run national news agency says Sunday's shelling hit several areas in Nabatiyeh with no casualties reported. The strikes come as President Joseph Aoun reported progress at the 7th round of talks. Meanwhile, Hezbollah has urged the government to halt negotiations. It's after Israel's foreign ministry published a map showing large parts of southern Lebanon as Israeli territory. Now let's bring in Maurice Hirsch, senior researcher at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, join us from Jerusalem. Good to have you, sir. Now, the Rome talks produced some concrete progress. What does the latest shelling tell us about how fragile that progress really is?
I think what we have to understand from this latest round of the conflict is that Iran is doing its utmost in order to undermine any type of regional stability. Hezbollah is Iran, Iran is Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is refusing to do what it was meant to have done, and that was to disarm. The Lebanese government is in negotiations with Israel. The Lebanese government wants peace with Israel as Israel wants with Lebanon. And unfortunately, you have this third country intervening to destroy Lebanon and to bring about more and more destruction. And that is an unfortunate reality for Lebanon. It's something that the Lebanese people, the Lebanese government needs to do more about, bringing about the disarmament and disbanding of Hezbollah.
Now, the two sides have agreed on countries that could verify Hezbollah's disarmament. How could that verification actually work on the ground?
I think you could see different forms of the verification, whether it be from taking away the massive amount of weapons that they hold and that they have and carry openly in the streets. I think the second part of that verification would have to include going into every one of the sites in which Hezbollah holds and stores its longer range weapons, its missiles, its UAVs that they've been using to attack Israel since the 8th of October 2023. And those are the processes that need to be carried out in order to ensure that this really very genocidal terrorist organization is disarmed and permanently prevented from continuing its aggression on behalf of Iran against Israel.
Now, Hezbollah is not part of the agreement and refuses to disarm. Can a deal succeed without the group that must ultimately carry it out?
Without question. I don't think anyone ever expects Hezbollah to join any type of agreement. Hezbollah is an internationally designated terrorist organization, and you don't really have those types of negotiations with these types of terrorists. And when they're being driven forward by Iran as a means to avoid dealing with its own aggression around the area and around the world, then that's part of the equation as well. And so these discussions need to be held between countries, between Israel and Lebanon. Hezbollah is not a country. It does not control Lebanon. That's what you have a Lebanese government for. And if there isn't a Lebanese government, well, let them stand up and say, you know what? We are just puppets in the hands of Hezbollah. We don't really represent anyone. And then everybody will know where we're standing. But when Joseph Ayoun stands before the international community as the president of Lebanon, he is representing a country, and he is representing the ability of his sovereign country to deal with genocidal terrorist organizations that operate within his territory.
Now, Israel links its withdrawal from southern Lebanon to Hezbollah's disarmament. Can those two processes realistically move forward at the same time?
I mean, one would hope so. One would hope that the Lebanese government and all of the different actors involved in this negotiations will bring about a situation where Hezbollah is disarmed. Once Hezbollah is disarmed and no longer poses a threat to Israel, to Israel's northern border, to Israel's civilians that live on the northern border, then Israel has nothing more to look for in any part of the territory of Lebanon. At the moment, all we're finding is more and more terror tunnels, more and more missiles that were hidden in those areas of southern Lebanon, where, according to UN Security Council Resolution 1701, Hezbollah was never meant to have been there. For the last 20 years, from 2006, Hezbollah was not meant to have been in southern Lebanon, but they're terrorists. So that's what terrorists do. And that's what the terrorists in Lebanon, at the behest of Iran, do. They threaten Israel. They flout international law. They flout international organizations. They don't care about the Security Council, and they don't care about the Lebanese people. They are there simply to destroy Israel.
Now, the Lebanese army is meant to take control as Israel withdraws. Is Beirut capable of extending state authority across the south?
I believe so, yes. I believe that the Lebanese army, that's receiving really very tremendous international support, is capable of installing itself as the governing factor within southern Lebanon, to ensuring that Hezbollah and the Iranian terrorists no longer pose that threat to Israel, that they can ensure that it is sovereign control of the Lebanese government through the Lebanese army. And if not, then maybe they should seriously ask for the help of Israel in order to get rid of and to purge themselves from these terrorists.
Now, in your opinion, more than 1 million Lebanese have been displaced. What would need to change before people can realistically begin returning home?
So I think really what needs to change is a number of things. First and foremost, disarming Hezbollah, showing the international community that Lebanon is capable of taking control of its own territory and preventing aggression against Israel. We didn't start this war. Let me just remind all of your viewers. We did not start this war with Lebanon. It was started by Hezbollah on the 8th of October, back then when they joined in the genocidal attack by Hamas from Gaza. There was a ceasefire, and they started again soon after the war started in Iran. There were no attacks on Lebanese territory. And yet, Hezbollah, as a terrorist organization, decided to carry on and to again launch this war against Israel. And unfortunately, when you look at the Gazan people in your previous articles and the Lebanese people in this case, both of them have a common enemy, and it is not Israel. It is Iran. It is the Iranian proxy Hamas in Gaza that refuses to disarm. It is the Iranian proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, that refuses to disarm. And they are both bringing death and destruction on both Gaza and Lebanon. And that has nothing to do with Israel. That is all to do with the terrorists and nothing to do with us, apart from us defending ourselves against their genocidal wishes.
Now let's go back to the verification process as we talked about before. Washington is now expected to choose the countries for the verification force. How much will the success of this process depend on the United States?
Well, I think the success will depend on choosing countries that are actually interested in bringing about an end to the conflict. If you choose countries like Qatar and Turkey, then that will only guarantee the continuation of the conflict, because they are countries that support this desire to destroy Israel. So it has to be a very, very well-chosen group of inspectors, group of verification countries, that will be able to give a true, independent and accurate report on the dismantling of Hezbollah and all of its weapons. That is something which will be critical moving forward.
Now, finally and briefly, sir, Lebanon says the talks made progress on borders and prisoners. Could those issues provide the first real building blocks for a wider settlement?
One would hope so. Again, as I said, Israel has no fight with Lebanon. We would like to, as we did in May 2000, withdraw, as was confirmed by the United Nations, to the international border between Israel and Lebanon. There should be no more conflict between us and Lebanon. We have common interests rather than common conflicts. And unfortunately, what we have is this terrorist organization that's interfering in the management of our what could possibly be very good relations. And so starting at a point where you have an international agreed border with terrorists, albeit being released into southern Lebanon, and then from there being taken to the north and distance from Israel, could be at the start of a process which could bring about those very, very fruitful benefits that will come from good relations and peaceful relations between us and our northern neighbors.
Thank you. That was Maurice Hirsch, Senior Researcher at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, Thad.
All right, now, Iran says there is no possibility of restarting negotiations with the United States as long as Washington continues to violate the ceasefire agreement. Turaj Shivalilu has more from Tehran.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says there can be no resumption of negotiations with Washington until the U.S. ends what Tehran calls its violations of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding and makes amends. Speaking to reporters at the Foreign Ministry in Tehran, Araghchi said there are currently no direct negotiations between Iran and the United States, although messages are being exchanged through intermediaries. He said several countries are working to create conditions for talks to resume, but stressed that Tehran does not consider the current exchanges as negotiations.
Yes, there is an exchange of messages through intermediaries, but this is not called negotiation. It is called an exchange of messages. The intermediaries are still trying to recreate the grounds for negotiation. From our perspective, until the violations of the Memorandum of Understanding end and the U.S. compensates for what it has violated in the memorandum, there is no possibility of restarting negotiations.
Araghchi also addressed talks with Oman over maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. He said discussions on establishing new routes are in their final stages, with experts currently working on the relevant maps. He added that under the proposed arrangements, existing routes would be replaced by new ones. But Araghchi stressed that reaching an agreement on maritime routes would not mean the Strait of Hormuz has been reopened. He said reopening the strategic waterway would depend on additional conditions which Tehran has already communicated to Washington through intermediaries. Turaj Shivalilu, reporting from former U.S. Embassy in Tehran for A News.
Now, meanwhile, the U.S. President Donald Trump says Washington is taking a cautious approach to Iran, favoring economic pressure over a new military offensive. Trump says the two sides are only semi-negotiating, while Iran says no direct talks are taking place. Meantime, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps says it will keep control of the Strait of Hormuz until its demands are met, and claims the other side is now focused on reopening the waterway. Iran's parliament has also approved the main framework of a plan to strengthen security around the strategic strait. Now, Yemen's Houthi military group has carried out missile and drone strikes on the Red Sea port city of Mocha, killing at least 7 people. The Houthis say they were targeting Saudi troops and weapons depot at the port. The strikes come after the group declared a naval blockade on Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea last month, citing what it called a Saudi siege. Riyadh denies the claim. The port is controlled by the Aden-based government and lies near the key Bab al-Mandeb Strait. A closure of the strait would leave Saudi Arabia without an alternative route to the Strait of Hormuz. All right, after the break, we'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now, Russia and Ukraine have exchanged another wave of overnight drone and missile attacks. In Russia's Belgorod region, at least 6 people were killed. In Ukraine's northern city of Sumy, at least 5 people were injured in overnight strikes, according to local authorities.
Russia and Ukraine have accused each other of launching large-scale overnight drone attacks, with casualties reported on both sides. Russian authorities said 6 people were killed and at least 25 others injured in the Belgorod region, where drone strikes also damaged apartment buildings, homes and vehicles. Russia's defense ministry said its forces intercepted and destroyed 153 Ukrainian drones over several regions, Russian-annexed Crimea and the Black Sea and Sea of Azov. Ukraine, meanwhile, said Russia launched 202 drones overnight, along with missile attacks on several regions. In the southern port city of Odessa, authorities said at least 14 people were injured and residential buildings were damaged. Ukraine's Air Force said 174 drones were intercepted or suppressed. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also reported strikes in several other regions, including Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Sumy and Zaporizhia.
Now, Bulgaria's defense chief said on Sunday there was no evidence that a drone which entered the country's airspace was deliberately targeting Bulgaria. Defense Chief Emil Eftimov said the unmanned aircraft may have been diverted by electronic air warfare. It had entered the country from Romania and exploded near the Trans-Balkan natural gas pipeline on Saturday. Initial analysis suggests it was a Maya-type decoy drone widely used by Ukrainian forces. Kyiv denies it targeted Bulgaria. However, Sofia has summoned Ukraine's ambassador for talks on Monday. Now, Pope Leo has urged Russia and Ukraine to stop attacks on civilians, warning that the violence is causing growing suffering on both sides. His appeal followed deadly attacks in several regions of both countries. During his Sunday prayer at the Vatican, the pontiff called for international humanitarian law to be respected and urged both sides to make space for diplomacy and dialogue. He also expressed concern over the conflict in Sudan, calling for humanitarian relief corridors and an immediate ceasefire. Now, Damascus and Moscow have agreed on new arrangements for Russia's long-standing presence at 2 key facilities on Syria's Mediterranean coast. The deal outlines changes to the management and future use of a key airbase and naval facility.
Syria and Russia have agreed that Damascus will take control of 2 key Russian bases on the Mediterranean. That's according to the Syrian state news agency, citing the Syrian Foreign Ministry on Sunday. It's after 18 months of intensive negotiations on the Meymim Air Base and Tartus naval facility. Under a new memorandum of understanding, Syria will gradually manage the civilian facilities, including Meymim Airport and a commercial berth at Tartus port. The 2 sides also agreed to change the function of the military facilities, turning them into joint training and qualification centres under new arrangements designed to serve their mutual interests. The transition is expected to be completed within 3 months. Syrian authorities described the agreement as an important development in relations with Moscow, saying it could open the way for a new phase of cooperation between the 2 countries. Russia has maintained a military presence at Meymim and Tartus for years, using the sites for air and naval operations as well as logistical support.
Firefighters continue to battle wildfires in parts of Spain and France as hot and dry conditions continue to raise the risk of further outbreaks. This week, the heat wave is set to continue as Western Europe braces for more sweltering high temperatures.
In eastern Spain, firefighters and members of the military emergency unit battled a wildfire in the Castellón region on Sunday. Around 700 people were evacuated from the town of Cati as a precaution, mainly because of heavy smoke. The fire began on Friday near the town of Tírig and has burned at least 684 hectares within a perimeter of 19 kilometers. No casualties have been reported. Regional authorities in Valencia said they were hopeful that changing weather conditions and higher humidity would help firefighters bring the blaze under control. Crews elsewhere in Spain were also responding to wildfires in the central Segovia mountain range and the southern province of Huelva. Across the border in southwestern France, firefighters quickly contained a smaller wildfire near Saint-Jean-de-Lac. The blaze burned around 3 hectares, but authorities deployed significant resources because of the weather conditions and the risk to nearby homes. The fire comes after a much larger wildfire in France's Gironde department in late July, which scorched 42,000 hectares and forced more than 220,000 people from their homes. Authorities remain on alert as another heat wave is expected this week. Meteo France forecasts temperatures in the mid to high 30s for much of the week, with nearby Bordeaux expected to reach 39 degrees Celsius on Thursday.
Now, still on wildfires, a fast-moving wildfire in Western Canada has forced thousands of people to flee their homes and prompted British Columbia to declare a state of emergency. The broad-range blaze nearly doubled in size overnight, triggering the largest evacuation operation of the summer in the province.
In Western Canada, residents of Peachland and Summerland remained under evacuation orders on Sunday as the Bald Range wildfire burned through nearby hillsides in British Columbia. Officials said it had spread to more than 10,300 hectares by Saturday night. That's 103 squared kilometres. Mayor Patrick Van Minsel said no homes had been lost. However, he urged residents to remain patient because conditions could change quickly.
Well, the concern is when can they go back to their home. The good news is that here in Peachland we have no losses of homes, so that's always a good news. They're very patient. They know they have to be patient because it doesn't make any sense to send somebody back not knowing what the situation is going to be a few hours later.
The wildfire nearly doubled in size overnight, prompting British Columbia to declare a state of emergency on Saturday. Officials said it triggered the province's largest evacuation operation of the summer. More than 20,000 people have been forced from their homes so far. The Canadian federal government said on Sunday it would assist British Columbia by providing shelter and accommodation for residents displaced in regions around Summerland and Peachland.
An intense heat wave is gripping the Korean peninsula, pushing temperatures to record and near-record highs. But North and South Korea are taking very different approaches to the extreme heat.
The Korean peninsula is enduring an intense heat wave. Temperatures are reaching record levels across both North and South Korea. In South Korea, dozens of people have died due to the heat. Temperatures have climbed above 41 degrees Celsius in parts of the country, while Seoul was forecast to approach its highest temperature on record. President Lee Jae-myung has declared the extreme weather a national disaster and ordered an all-out response.
I ask all government ministries and local governments to make every effort to minimize heat wave-related damage by fully mobilizing all available personnel and resources.
Authorities have deployed drones equipped with loudspeakers and thermal imaging cameras to warn elderly farmers to take breaks. Officials are enforcing stronger protections for outdoor workers and vulnerable residents in rural areas.
Hello, this is Gyeongsangbuk-do Provincial Government. The weather is extremely hot. Please drink plenty of water while outdoors and take breaks at cooling shelter. After getting enough rest, resume your work slowly and carefully.
Across the border, North Korea reported its highest temperature since records began. State media says the heat has reached 37 degrees Celsius. Official outlets have promoted traditional remedies, including dog meat soup, chicken soup, and porridges as ways to cope with the heat. At the same time, the state is reviving propaganda that portrays Kim Jong-un as a leader who shares the hardships of ordinary citizens in the heat. Unlike South Korea, its northern neighbor has not reported any heat-related deaths. Instead, it's highlighting crowded beaches, water parks, and other leisure sites as residents seek relief from the scorching temperatures.
Now we turn our attention to Africa. Rwanda could soon become the transit point for migrants deported from Europe. Kigali says it is in early talks with several European countries, but no deal has been reached. The talks come as European governments seek new ways to return people whose asylum claims have been rejected. Michael Balake has more.
Rwanda is exploring a new role in Europe's migration policy as a possible transit point for deported migrants. The government says it is holding preliminary talks with several European countries. But Kigali is stressing one thing: no agreement has been reached. Officials have not named the countries involved or given details of how such an arrangement would work. The talks come as European governments face pressure to increase deportation of people whose asylum claims have failed. Rwanda has already been involved in similar migration arrangements. It's previously agreed to receive some migrants deported from the United States. For Rwanda, such an arrangement can bring financial benefits. In 2002, Rwanda also agreed a deal with Britain to receive asylum seekers with payments worth millions of dollars going to Kigali. The plan was abandoned before any deportations to Rwanda could begin. But such deals have also drawn criticisms from rights groups over concerns about the protection and legal status of deported migrants. For now, the talks are still at an early stage, with Kigali waiting to see whether they can lead to a formal arrangement. Michael Baleke for A News in Kampala.
Now, residents of Spain's Ceuta enclave are calling for urgent action after last month's mass arrival of migrants. 4 religious communities joined local authorities and unions in a demonstration calling for a response from Spain and Europe.
Hundreds of Ceuta residents took to the streets, demanding action over the migration crisis in the tiny Spanish enclave. They're calling on the Spanish government, European institutions and other public authorities to urgently address the overcrowded situation facing the city. Christians, Muslims, Jews and Hindus joined unions and local authorities at Constitution Square on Sunday.
Ceuta cannot tackle on its own a situation that far exceeds its capabilities and which affects the whole of Spain and Europe. For this reason, through this peaceful civic gathering, we call on the Spanish government, the European institutions and all public authorities to urgently address the reality our city is facing.
The demonstration comes after a major influx from Morocco on the 30th of July. Spanish authorities said as many as 72,000 people crossed into Ceuta after weeks of smaller arrivals. Dozens died in the rush. Most have since returned, but hundreds of unaccompanied minors remain. Spain's government says it expects to transfer some of those minors to the mainland within weeks. Youth Minister Cira Rego said the move would ease pressure on overcrowded reception centres in the enclave.
All right, after the break, we'll discuss key regional headlines. Stay with us. Welcome back to Daybreak. Now, 1 year after the Washington breakthrough, Azerbaijan and Armenia are marking the anniversary with renewed high-level diplomacy. President Donald Trump spoke separately with President Ilham Aliyev and Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, while the two leaders also held a direct telephone conversation focused on progress towards peace, connectivity, and the implementation of TRIP. To discuss where the peace process stands 1 year on and what comes next, we're joined by Orhan Valiyev, professor at Gaza University. Good to have you, sir.
Pleasure.
Now, President Trump held separate phone conversations with President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan on the anniversary of the Washington breakthrough. How committed is the United States in ensuring that the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace process continues to advance, particularly on connectivity and the implementation of the agreements reached in Washington?
A year ago, it was the historic and turning point, the future of the South Caucasus that happened in this city. And then through the Donald Trump's call, we discussed the strategic importance, I think, of the Washington summit, where they signed the declaration and initiated the peace agreement between two countries. And it was a turning point that I emphasized before. Because a peace chapter was opened for Azerbaijan and Armenia that will reshape the future of the country. So after a year, we have already the tangible results. So what does the mean tangible result? Sending to Armenia from Azerbaijan, also puts the from certain countries through Azerbaijan transiting through Azerbaijan to Armenia. So more importantly, we dialogue, but this dialogue is not just between the governments. It has been ended and includes journalists. So if I'm mistaken, both sides was Spain, and then the second one. So that we started to have the dialogue between the two countries, and also we should forgo the contribution of the factory principles of Azerbaijan that offered by the foreign minister of Azerbaijan in 2022 that led the process to the bilateral meeting in Abu Dhabi and then the Washington DC that they signed the declaration and initiated this agreement.
All right, so we seem to be having a problem with the connection. We'll try to reconnect later. All right, moving on. Kazakhstan's oil exports through the Caspian Pipeline Consortium fell more than 20% below the original target in July. The decline comes amid growing concerns over the security of the country's main oil export route through the Black Sea. Farza Kalimoziner has more.
Oil exports through the Caspian Pipeline Consortium fell more than 20% below their original target in July, according to international analytics firm Kpler. The decline followed a series of drone attacks on tankers near the CPC terminal at Yuzhnaya Azurovka, close to Novorossiysk. The disruptions also affected production, with Kazakhstan cutting its oil output by 14% in July compared with June. And for Kazakhstan, the stakes are particularly high. More than 80% of the country's oil exports go through the CPC, including crude from its three major fields, Tengiz, Kashagan and Karachaganak. It's Kazakhstan's main oil export route, carrying at least 80 million tons of crude every year. And according to Bloomberg, Ukraine has now agreed to refrain from striking CPC infrastructure in the Black Sea, as well as non-Russian tankers heading to its terminal. The agreement applies to vessels that are not under Ukrainian sanctions and are not carrying Russian cargo. The Trump administration had earlier warned Ukraine against targeting vessels and energy infrastructure belonging to third countries in the Black Sea. Chevron, which holds a 15% stake in the CPC, also raised concerns with the White House over potential damage to the pipeline infrastructure. For Kazakhstan, the economic cost could already be significant. energy and investment experts estimate that the country may have lost more than $700 million in July alone because of the attacks on the CPC.
Now, researchers in New York have successfully used gene editing tech to breed dogs that won't trigger allergic reaction. Now, here's Nathan Kamanga with Switch.
Did you know that 1 in 7 people experience allergies when in close proximity to dogs? That's a little over 1 billion people on Earth. And the worst thing is, some might actually fancy the idea of owning a dog, but they can't. Well, what if I told you that's about to change? And I promise you, the solution is not a robot dog. We've seen enough of those. A New York-based startup called Kindred Companion Sciences has successfully used pioneering gene editing tech to breed dogs lacking the primary protein responsible for human-dog allergies. The dogs, in this case beagles, still behave like any other dogs. They can do tricks, they bark, and probably would even bite. The Kindred team says it also has plans to expand to other breeds, and even has an interest in making allergy-free service dogs. So maybe your dream of having a canine companion is not totally lost. Now, I know I promised not to bring up robot dogs, but you're going to want to hear about this one. So apparently, several apartment complexes in Atlanta have begun replacing overnight security guards with robot dogs. Operated by a tech startup called Undaunted, the 4-legged robots are remotely controlled by human operators who monitor live camera feeds and even communicate directly with residents through onboard speakers. Property managers say the machines are helping deter crime and improve safety, with some properties recording a 100% drop in burglaries. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I too would be terrified if I heard a dog speaking to me with a human voice. In 2026, it's almost as if manufacturers have settled for touch as the default means of interacting with gadgets. Want to check your notifications? Just swipe down on your phone screen. Fancy a change in volume? Well, just slide your finger along the stem of your AirPods. But in a world of 8 billion people, and with each individual possessing different abilities, the notion of just using touch does not apply to everyone. And thankfully, some people have taken notice and are doing something about it. A San Francisco-based startup called Augmental has developed a device that lets users control computers, tablets, and smartphones using tongue gestures. It's called MouthPad, and it sits on your upper teeth like a retainer and has a pressure-sensitive trackpad on the palate. The company says MouthPad is discreet and unobtrusive, so users don't have to worry about their speech being affected. The device supports Augmental's goal of making digital technology easier for everyone to use. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to catch up with us for more tech news and insights on the next show.
Now we return to more global stories. Typhoon Dolphin has made landfall in eastern China, bringing widespread disruption after more than 1 million people were moved to safety and thousands of flights cancelled. The storm is also driving heavy monsoon rains and flooding in the Philippines.
Dolphin hit China's Zhejiang province on Sunday afternoon, with the National Meteorological Center earlier warning of sustained winds of up to 162 kilometers per hour. It is the most powerful typhoon to make landfall in China so far this year. More than 1 million people have been moved to safety, while Shanghai evacuated at least 30,300 people and cancelled about 1,500 flights, according to flight tracking provider VariFlight. At the Huadian Yuhuan offshore wind farm, fixed cameras captured the storm as the facility activated its highest level emergency response. The farm was caught in the storm's force 12 wind zone, with gusts exceeding 46.1 meters per second. All 32 turbines were safely shut down, with their blades yawed into a defensive position. Dolphin had already swept through Japan's southern Okinawa prefecture, where 6 people were injured and more than 50,000 buildings lost power. Meanwhile, an enhanced monsoon intensified by Dolphin has caused flooding in Manila and other parts of the western Philippines. In Quezon City, torrential rain caused waist-deep flooding, prompting more than 1,000 residents to evacuate. The National Disaster Agency says around 110,000 families have been affected, with about 7,300 people staying in evacuation centers. At least 6 people have been reported dead over the past week, most in landslides and flooding.
Alleged Irish crime gang boss Daniel Kinahan has been charged with directing a criminal organization after being extradited from the United Arab Emirates. Kinahan was flown from Dubai to a military base outside Dublin on Sunday before being taken directly to court for a rare Sunday night hearing. Armed police guarded the courthouse as crowds gathered outside, with some filming as unmarked police vehicles left after the brief proceedings. Kinahan was remanded in custody. He is due back in court on the 5th of October. Now, India is emerging as one of the world's major economic powers, and its growing weight is increasingly shaping the geopolitical landscape. But a new analysis argues that this economic strength has not necessarily translated into greater geopolitical influence. Here's more.
India's economic rise is changing its position on the world stage. With more than 1.4 billion people, India is now one of the world's largest economies. Its nominal GDP is around $4 trillion, putting it among the top economies globally. That economic growth has given New Delhi greater weight in international affairs. But economic power has not always translated into diplomatic success. A recent opinion analysis in Eurasia Review titled Indian Foreign Policy Blunders argues that New Delhi may have become too confident in the geopolitical influence created by its economic rise. The challenge is particularly clear in India's relationship with the United States. India and the US have strengthened strategic cooperation, including through the Quad with Japan and Australia, largely in response to China's growing influence. But at the same time, India has maintained close ties with Russia and continued buying Russian oil despite US pressure. Trade disputes and disagreements over India's energy ties with Moscow have added to tensions between New Delhi and Washington. India's long-standing rivalry with Pakistan is another factor shaping its regional policy. Pakistan maintains close ties with China and continues to play a role in regional diplomacy, including contacts linked to the conflict in Iran. India has also faced growing difficulties with some of its neighbors. Relations with Bangladesh have deteriorated since the political changes that removed Sheikh Hasina from power. The Eurasia Review analysis argues that New Delhi's close relationship with her government contributed to the deterioration. In the South Caucasus, India has strengthened defense cooperation with Armenia, including major arms agreements. This has coincided with more difficult relations between India and Azerbaijan, which maintains close ties with Pakistan. The Eurasia Review analysis links India's policy towards Armenia partly to its wider rivalry with Pakistan. But the regional picture is also changing. Armenia has moved towards normalizing relations with Azerbaijan and Turkey. Taken together, these developments highlight the limits of turning economic strength into diplomatic influence. India is becoming a larger economic and strategic power, but it still faces the challenge of balancing relations with global powers and regional neighbors.
All right, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.